The heavy bass of the whiskey glass met the dark wood of the bar with a sound like a distant closing door. Solid. Final. Before Lena could lift it again, a hand covered hers. It was not a violent gesture, but it was absolute. Warmth, weight, and the clean, metallic scent of rain on steel. Her fingers were trapped between his skin and the cold glass. She did not look up. She watched his thumb, unadorned by any ring, stroke the back of her hand once, a gesture of placating ownership she had never consented to. Then the voice came, low and calm, meant only for her, a vibration that seemed to travel up her arm from his hand. My rivals just walked in. They're sitting at the table by the window. For the next 11 minutes, you're going to be my fiancé. And you're going to be very, very happy to see me. Now, the request was not a request. The deadline was not a suggestion. And the threat was in the quiet, desperate precision of the words. She felt the fine hairs on her arms stand up, a primal response to a predator that had just marked her as its own. She could feel his gaze on the side of her face, waiting. Her world, which for the last year had consisted of the sterile quiet of the clinic, the scent of antiseptic, and the lonely hum of her apartment refrigerator, had just been breached. You know that feeling, don't you? The one where the floor vanishes and you have to decide, in the space of a single heartbeat, whether to fall or to fly. Lena had been falling for a long time. She decided to try flying. Slowly, she lifted her head, letting her gaze travel from his perfectly creased trousers, up the line of a dark, tailored suit, to a face that was all sharp angles and exhausted control. He was handsome, but it was an incidental fact, like the grain in the wood of the bar. The thing that mattered was the look in his dark eyes. It was a look she recognized from the animals she treated, the ones caught in traps, the ones who knew the cost of every move. He was asking for a performance, but his eyes were begging for a truce. Lena tilted her head, a slow, deliberate motion. She let a small, tired smile touch her lips, a gesture she hadn't used authentically in months. It felt like stretching a muscle that had atrophied. "You're late," she said, her voice a low murmur that wouldn't carry past a shoulder. She slid her hand from under his, a reclaiming of territory, and laced her fingers with his instead. His hand tightened around hers, a fractional, involuntary response. Relief. She felt it pass through him like an electrical current. She had agreed. She had not screamed, or run, or made a scene that would get them both killed. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, the performance of intimacy, so convincing it made her stomach clench. "Thank you," he whispered, the words a raw exhalation of breath against her skin. Then his public voice returned, smooth as the whiskey in her glass, loud enough for the table by the window to hear. "I know, my girl. Forgive me." Business. He turned his head slightly, a calculated move to ensure he was seen, and his eyes met those of a man across the room. The man was older, with a face like a collapsed building, but his suit was just as expensive. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Acknowledgement. Minjun, the stranger holding her hand, nodded back, his smile never faltering. Lena felt like a prop, a shield made of flesh and bone. She was a beige dress and a black coat in a dimly lit bar, a woman whose name he didn't know, serving as a human Kevlar vest. She brought their joined hands to her lips and pressed a kiss to his knuckles, her eyes on his. It was a gesture of pure invention, a piece of a story she was writing in real time. His eyes widened slightly.
Surprise.
She was a better actor than he had anticipated. She was a better survivor. The man at the window looked away, turning back to his companion. The immediate danger had passed, but Lena knew, with the certainty of an animal sensing a storm, that this was not over. The 11 minutes were just the beginning. He did not let go of her hand. Not as he laid a thick fold of cash on the bar, enough to cover her drink 100 times over. Not as he guided her from the stool, his body a solid presence at her back. He moved with a liquid grace that spoke of years of navigating unseen threats. As they walked towards the door, away from the men at the window, he kept up the performance, his voice a warm, proprietary murmur. "The car is just outside, sweetheart. We'll go back to my place. Each endearment was a small, sharp shock against her skin. He was using words of intimacy as weapons, and she was the one being aimed. They stepped out into the cold night air, the city noise a welcome blanket after the suffocating quiet of the bar. A black sedan, so polished it reflected the streetlights like fractured stars, sat idling at the curb. A driver in a dark suit got out and opened the rear passenger door. Minjun's hand on her back was firm, guiding her in. The door closed with a heavy, soundproof thud, sealing them inside. The performance ended the moment they were cocooned in the buttery leather and silence of the car. He released her hand and slumped back against the seat, closing his eyes for a full 10 seconds. When he opened them, the smooth, charming man from the bar was gone. The exhausted, dangerous animal was back. "My name is Minjun," he said, his voice flat. He did not offer an apology. He offered a fact. "What's yours?" "Lena," she replied, her own voice clipped. She was cataloging the details of the car's interior, the thickness of the glass, the lock mechanism on the door. Assessing the enclosure. "Lena," he repeated, tasting the name. "Thank you, Lena. You were very convincing. I'm a quick study," she said, meeting his gaze in the dim light. "What do you want from me?" He let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but it had no humor in it. It was the sound of air escaping a punctured lung. "I want to make you a deal." The car pulled smoothly into traffic, the city lights sliding across his face, illuminating the sharp line of his jaw, the faint scar above his eyebrow. He looked like a man who collected scars, both visible and not. "I need a fiancé. Not for 11 minutes. For 3 months. It needs to be someone with no connections to my world. Someone clean. Someone believable." He paused, his eyes searching her face. "Someone who looks at me the way you did in there. Like I'm both a promise and a threat." "Why me?" Lena asked. The question was a scalpel. She wanted to know the logic of the trap. He didn't hesitate. "Because you were alone. Because you weren't trying to be seen. Because when I sat down, you didn't flinch, you assessed. And because of the way you were looking at that drink before I interrupted. Like you were mourning something. People who are grieving are predictable. They have nothing left to lose." The honesty was brutal. It was also, she hated to admit, accurate. She had been mourning. It was the 2-year anniversary of the day her brother, Sam, had died. The whiskey was a ritual, a quiet, painful communion with a ghost. He had seen the hole in her life and correctly identified it as a lever he could use. "What makes you think I'd agree to this?" she said, her voice tight. "You have no idea who I am. I know you work at the Ashton Animal Medical Center," he said, and her blood went cold. "You're a veterinary technician. You've been there for 3 years. You're good at your job. You live alone in a rent-controlled apartment in a building on the west side owned by an elderly woman named Gable. You have student loans totaling $62,000 and a lingering hospital debt of twice that from your brother's illness. A debt you have been paying 17% interest on for 23 months. He had not just chosen her at random. He had vetted her. The thought was terrifying. He had watched her, learned the shape of her life, the weight of her grief, before he ever approached her. The encounter in the bar wasn't an improvisation. It was an ambush. "I'm offering to solve your problems, Lena," he continued, his tone devoid of pity. "It was a business proposition. I will pay off every cent of your debt. All of it. The loans, the hospital bills. Wiped clean. I will also pay you a salary for the 3 months. Enough that you won't have to work for 5 years if you don't want to. In exchange, you will play the part of my adoring fiancé. You will attend events with me. You will wear my ring. You will live in my home. You will be seen. After 3 months, we have a very public, very amicable breakup. You walk away free and clear. I get what I need." "And what is that?" she pushed. "What do you get?" "A shield," he said simply. "My father is traditional. He wants to broker an alliance by marrying me to the daughter of a rival. I have no interest in that war. A fiancé, especially an outsider, an American girl he cannot vet or control, makes that arrangement impossible. It buys me time. It keeps me from being a pawn in his game." The car was silent for a long moment, the only sound the soft hum of the engine. It was a ridiculous, insane proposal. A fairy tale with teeth. but the debt. Sam's debt. It was a stone she carried every single day. A constant, crushing reminder of her failure to save him. To have it gone. There are rules, she said, her mind working, calculating. This was a negotiation for survival. My rules, he nodded. Of course. 1, she began, holding up a finger. You don't lie to me. You can withhold information. You can say later. But you do not lie, he considered this, then gave a sharp nod. Agreed, 2. This is a performance. You don't touch me outside of what's required for the role. No surprises, his lips thinned. Acceptable, and 3, she said, her voice dropping. My life remains my own.
My job.
My apartment. I don't disappear into yours. I need a place to go back to when this is over. He was quiet for a long time. She could see the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing the risk of her independence against the value of her compliance. The job is fine, he said finally. The apartment, you will need to live with me for this to be convincing. But you can keep your apartment. As an anchor, he extended his hand across the space between them. Do we have a deal, Lena? She looked at his hand, then at his face. He was not a good man. He was a man who used people, who bought solutions to his problems. But he was also the first person in 2 years to tell her the unvarnished truth about what he saw when he looked at her. He saw a survivor. And he was offering her a way to finally stop drowning. She took his hand. We have a deal. The apartment felt different with him in it. Lena's space was small but meticulously ordered, a fortress built of second-hand books, neatly folded blankets, and the scent of lavender and clean linen. It was a place designed for one person to grieve quietly. Minjun's presence was a violation of its core principles. He stood in the middle of her living room, his expensive suit an indictment of her worn armchair, his stillness a disruption of the quiet air. He moved with a predatory economy, his gaze sweeping the room, cataloging details just as she had done in his car. He was reading her life from the objects she'd curated. His eyes lingered on a framed photo on the bookshelf. It was of her and Sam, taken a year before he got sick. They were teenagers, all limbs and goofy grins, standing on a beach with the wind whipping their hair. Your brother? He asked. The question was soft. Yes, Lena said, her voice tight. She did not want to talk about Sam with him. Sam was hers. He was the part of her life that was not for sale, not part of their transaction. Minjun seemed to understand. He looked away from the photo, his focus shifting to a small, intricate ceramic pot on the windowsill that held a struggling succulent. He touched one of its fleshy leaves with a gentleness that seemed entirely out of character. It needs more light, he commented, his voice returning to its flat, neutral tone. And less water. She bristled at the implicit criticism of her care. I know. It was a gift. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. The first payment will be in your account tomorrow. Enough to clear the hospital debt. The rest will follow once the paperwork is signed. He was all business again. The brief moment of shared humanity over the photograph and the plant sealed away. I'll have a car bring you to my penthouse in the morning. 7 o'clock. We need to establish a routine. Pack a bag for a few weeks. The efficiency was jarring. He was restructuring her entire existence with the casual authority of a man who moved mountains for a living. Before she could respond, a soft, polite knock sounded at her door. Lena froze. No one knocked on her door. Mrs. Gable, her landlady who lived downstairs, was the only person who ever came by unannounced, and she always called first.
Minun's body shifted instantly.
He moved away from the center of the room, placing himself in a corner with a clear line of sight to both the door and the window, a subtle, instinctive retreat into shadow. He was a creature of threat assessment. Are you expecting someone? He asked, his voice a low whisper. Lena shook her head, walking cautiously to the door and peering through the peephole. It was Mrs. Gable, her white hair pulled back in its customary neat bun, her hands holding a small plate covered in foil. Relief washed over Lena. It's just my landlady, she whispered back, unlocking the door. Mrs. Gable, is everything okay? She asked, opening the door just wide enough to speak through the crack. The elderly woman smiled, a sweet, crinkled expression. I made too much bulgogi, dear. I know it's your favorite. I thought you might. Her voice trailed off as she saw past Lena's shoulder, her eyes landing on Minjun where he stood half-hidden in the dim light. The smile on Mrs. Gable's face did not vanish. It froze. It became a brittle, polite mask. Her gaze, usually so warm, sharpened with a shocking intensity. She looked at Minjun not as a stranger, but as a ghost. Then, in a voice that was suddenly formal, stripped of all its neighborly warmth, she spoke a sentence in perfect, clear Korean. Lena didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was a statement of recognition. A question steeped in a history Lena knew nothing about. Minjun stepped forward, out of the shadows. He bowed his head slightly to the old woman, a gesture of profound, almost reluctant respect. He answered her in the same language, his voice low and deferential in a way Lena had not yet heard. Mrs. Gable's face seemed to collapse inward, the weight of whatever they were discussing settling into the lines around her eyes. She looked from Minjun back to Lena, and for the first time, Lena saw fear in her landlady's expression. The plate of food in her hands trembled slightly. She pushed it into Lena's hands. "Enjoy your dinner, dear," she said, her English returning, but it was strained, thin as old paper. Then she turned without another word and walked away, her footsteps quick and uneven on the stairs. Lena stood in the doorway, the warm plate in her hands, a profound sense of wrongness settling in her stomach. Her safe place, her fortress, had just been breached from the inside. Lena closed the door and turned to face him, the plate of food feeling impossibly heavy. The air in the small apartment was thick with unspoken history. "What was that?" she demanded. "Who is she to you?" Minjun's face was a mask of careful neutrality, but she could see the tension in the set of his jaw. He had been thrown off balance. This was a variable he had not accounted for in his meticulous planning. "She knew my father," he said, the words clipped. "A long time ago." In Seoul, she looked terrified, Lena pressed, setting the plate down on her small kitchen counter. The smell of the warm beef and sesame oil, usually a comfort, was now nauseating. "What did she say to you?" He hesitated, his gaze drifting back to the door as if he could still feel the old woman's presence. He was weighing his promise. "You don't lie to me." "You can withhold information. You can say later." He seemed to be debating which option to choose. Finally, he met her eyes. She asked if the sins of the father were still being visited upon the son. The biblical phrasing was chilling. It spoke of debts and consequences that span generations. "And what did you tell her?" Lena whispered. "I told her I was trying to build a house on different ground. It was the most poetic, and perhaps the most honest, thing he had said to her. It was an admission that the ground his father had built on was poisoned." Lena felt a tremor of something that was not quite fear and not quite sympathy. It was a dangerous, destabilizing understanding. Her quiet, predictable landlady, the woman who brought her food and reminded her to put out her recycling, was entangled in the violent, dynastic world this man was trying to escape. Her refuge wasn't a refuge at all. It was just another corner of his map. "This changes the deal," Lena said, her voice regaining its strength. "You brought your world to my door. The one place you agreed to leave alone. It was a coincidence," he stated, though his tone lacked conviction. "A 1 in a million chance. I had no idea she was here." "It doesn't matter," Lena shot back. "She knows you. She knows who you are. That makes her a liability to you, and it makes you a danger to her. And to me. My connection to her makes me a worse shield for you, not a better one." And she was thinking like him now, seeing the strategic angles, the liabilities. He was silent, watching her. He seemed to be reassessing her, seeing a new depth to her resilience. She wasn't just a survivor. She was strategic. "You're right," he said at last, the admission costing him something. "It complicates things." He walked over to the window, peering down at the street below through a gap in the blinds. "This is no longer a simple arrangement. Her presence here, it could be interpreted in ways that might be unfortunate." The understatement was terrifying. He was talking about violence. He was talking about Mrs. Gable being seen as an ally, a piece on the board. "You have to leave," Lena said, the words coming out with more force than she intended.
"Now."
"The car can come in the morning. But you can't be here." "Not anymore." He turned from the window, his face unreadable in the dim light. They may already know I'm here. Leaving now could be more dangerous than staying. For the first time, Lena felt a surge of genuine, hot anger. This is the cost you were talking about, isn't it? The part you said later, too. It wasn't just about attending parties. It was about this. About being a target. You were never supposed to be a target, he said, his voice low and intense. You were supposed to be invisible. Untouchable. The fact that your landlady is from my father's past is a complication I could never have foreseen. He took a step closer to her, his professional calm cracking just enough for her to see the frustration underneath. This deal was meant to protect us both. It's not protecting me, she countered, standing her ground. It's put a bullseye on the only person who has shown me any kindness since my brother died. The mention of Sam hung in the air between them, a raw nerve exposed. His expression softened fractionally. The exhausted man reappeared from behind the strategist. I will handle it, he said. I will ensure she is not harmed. You have my word. Lena let out a broken, humorless laugh. It was a sound that felt torn from her throat. Your word? The word of a man who researched my dead brother's hospital bills to use as leverage against me? What is that worth? The truth of her words hit him. She saw it land. He had no defense. There was no apology he could offer that would bridge the chasm of that particular violation. He had used her deepest wound to get what he wanted, and now he was offering assurances from that same poison well. The foundation of their deal, which she had thought was ugly but honest, was fractured. She realized he had withheld more than just information. He had withheld the true nature of the risk. The confrontation hung in the air, unresolved. He didn't leave. He stood by the window, a silent, brooding statue, occasionally glancing down at the street. The implicit threat was clear. Leaving was now more dangerous than staying. Her apartment, her sanctuary, had become a gilded cage, and he was the warden. Lena didn't sleep. She sat in the worn armchair, the one Sam had helped her carry up 3 flights of stairs, and watched him. She tracked his breathing, the way he held the tension in his shoulders. It was like observing a big cat in a small enclosure, a creature of immense power forced into a state of unnatural stillness. He was a problem she had to solve. At some point after midnight, she spoke into the silence. Tell me about your father. He turned from the window, his face etched with fatigue. He seemed surprised by the question, by her willingness to re-engage on a new front. He walked over and sat on the edge of her coffee table, a few feet from her chair, creating an island of negotiation in the middle of her living room. My father, he began, his voice low and stripped of all performance, believes in tradition. He believes in blood and iron. He built his organization on a foundation of fear and loyalty that are, to him, the same thing. He sees alliances as chains, and he wants to chain me to a family that will strengthen his position. The rival, Lena clarified. The man from the bar. No, Minjun said, and she felt a fresh chill. The man in the bar was a message from that family. An overture. A reminder that they are watching. The real rival is my father. The revelation landed with quiet, devastating force. This wasn't about rival gangs. This was a civil war. A son trying to escape the orbit of a father who is more king than parent. He doesn't want an alliance, Minjun continued, his gaze distant. He wants a merger. He wants to absorb their power, and he wants to use my marriage as the mechanism. He thinks it will bind me to his way of life forever. And you? She asked. What do you want? He looked at her then, and for the first time, she saw something beyond the exhaustion and the control. She saw a flicker of a man she didn't know, a man who might have existed in a different life. I want out, he said. The words were simple, but they held the weight of a lifetime. I've spent my entire adult life cleaning up his messes, managing his wars, being the respectable face of an ugly business. I want a life that is safe. A life that is quiet. It was the same thing she wanted. The irony was bitter. They were two people from opposite ends of the universe, both craving the same small, simple peace. And they were using each other to try and get it, creating a chaos that was the antithesis of everything they craved. This was the full transparency she had demanded. The ugly truth laid bare. He wasn't just buying time. He was staging a rebellion. And he had made her the face of it. "You chose me because I was grieving," she said, connecting the dots. "You thought I would be compliant. You thought I wouldn't ask questions. You thought I was too broken to fight back." "No," he said, and his intensity was startling. He leaned forward, his hands on his knees. "I chose you because I recognized you. That stillness you have, it's not weakness. It's armor. It's the calm that comes after the worst thing has already happened. I knew you wouldn't break. I knew you would understand the stakes. I chose you because you are a survivor. Like me, his confession was the most intimate thing that had passed between them. He wasn't telling her she was beautiful or special. He was telling her he saw her damage and recognized it as a form of strength. It was an inverted comfort, a frightening and deeply resonant form of connection. He saw the part of her that she kept hidden from the world, the part forged in the fire of loss, and he had not been afraid of it. He had been drawn to it. The deal was no longer about money or debt. It had become something far more complicated. It was about two people with calcified hearts trying to leverage each other into a life where they might, finally, be able to feel something again. The next morning, the city woke up to a thin, determined drizzle. The gray light filled her apartment, muting the colors, making everything feel subdued and somber. They hadn't spoken again after his confession. He had eventually settled onto her small sofa, not sleeping, just resting in that state of watchful stillness. Lena had remained in her chair. It was a silent, overnight siege. A car, a different one from the night before, arrived at 7 o'clock sharp. There was no fanfare, just a quiet text message to his phone. He stood up, his suit rumpled, the first sign of imperfection she had seen on him. "It's time to go," he said. It wasn't a command. It was a statement of fact. She looked around her apartment, at the picture of Sam, at the struggling succulent, at the plate of cold bulgogi still sitting on the counter. It was all she had. A life she had carefully constructed from the wreckage of another one. He was asking her to walk away from it, to step into his world of penthouses and invisible wars, to continue a deal that had been founded on a lie of omission. He walked to the door and paused, his hand on the knob. He didn't look at her. "There's a plane ticket," he said, his voice low, directed at the wood of the door. "First class. To anywhere you want to go. A new name, a new passport. A bank account with enough money to start over completely. It's in an envelope in the glove compartment of the car. The driver will take you to the airport instead of my penthouse. You can walk out this door and never see me again. Your debt will still be cleared. Consider it payment for the inconvenience." He was giving her an out. A real one. No strings attached. It was the escape she should have dreamed of. Complete freedom. A clean slate. The chance to leave the ghosts of the city behind and become someone new, someone not defined by debt and loss. He was offering her a life that was safe. She thought about it. She pictured herself in a new city, a new apartment, with no history and no connections. The image should have been liberating. Instead, it felt like an amputation. It was the sterile, lonely quiet she already knew, just in a different location. The past year had been safe. It had also been hollow. In the last 12 hours, she had felt more than she had in the last 12 months. Fear, anger, a startling flicker of understanding. It wasn't pleasant, but it was real. For the first time since Sam died, someone had looked at her and seen not a fragile victim, but a fighter. He had seen her armor, and instead of trying to break it, he had told her he wore the same kind. She walked to the door and stood behind him. "And what happens to you?" she asked quietly. "If I leave?" He was silent for a moment. "I'll deal with my father," he said. The words were empty. They both knew that without her, his shield was gone. He would be forced into the marriage, absorbed into his father's world completely. His rebellion would be over. Lena thought of Mrs. Gable, of the fear in her eyes. She thought of the way Min-Jun had touched her dying plant with such unexpected gentleness. She thought of the exhaustion in his voice when he said the word out. "I'm not going to the airport," she said. He turned around slowly, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. Surprise warred with relief, and underneath it all was a deep, profound weariness. Lena, he started, as if to argue, to save her from her own decision. She held up a hand, cutting him off. The deal is being renegotiated, she stated, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. Right here, right now, she was no longer the pawn. She was a player. She had weighed the options, assessed the risks, and she was making a choice. Not for him, not for the money, but for the flicker of life she felt in herself, the part that had been dormant for 2 years. The part that was tired of being safe and wanted to be real. New terms, Lena said, her voice echoing slightly in the small hallway. She did not move from her spot, creating a deliberate threshold he could not cross without agreeing. From now on, this is not a performance. It's a partnership. He watched her, his expression guarded, but he was listening. He was listening to her in a way she suspected few people ever had. No more secrets, she continued, ticking the points off in her mind. You can't use later as a shield. If I ask a question that affects my safety or the safety of anyone I care about, you answer it. The whole truth. He gave a single, sharp nod. The concession was huge. He was surrendering his primary defensive mechanism. And Mrs. Gable, Lena added, her voice hardening. She is off limits. You will find a way to guarantee her safety, a way that I can see and verify. She is to be untouched by any of this. She is a non-combatant. I already have, he said quietly. I made a call last night. My most trusted man is watching her building. Not as a threat, as a protector. He will remain there until this is over. No one from my world or any other will get near her. The quiet efficiency of it stunned her. While she had been watching him, he had been acting. He had understood her demand before she had even fully articulated it. He was already trying to earn back the trust he had broken. Finally, she said, taking a deep breath. This was the most important term. When this is over, you disappear. But not from your own life. You get out. For real. You take that house you want to build on different ground, and you build it. You don't get dragged back into your father's world. That's the endgame. That's the win condition for this partnership. He stared at her, and for the first time, his composure broke entirely. A look of raw, unshielded vulnerability flashed in his eyes. She wasn't just demanding her own safety, she was demanding his freedom. She was writing his survival into the contract. It was an act of shocking, radical empathy. An investment. Those terms are not in your favor, he said, his voice rough. They ask everything of me and offer you nothing but more risk. I'm not doing it for you, she lied, though it was only half a lie. I'm a vet tech. I have a professional obligation not to let wounded things crawl off and die in a ditch. The professional metaphor was her shield, her way of framing this insane choice in the language of her own world. It was a way of making it logical, of convincing herself. He saw through it, of course. He saw the truth underneath. He saw that she was choosing to stay not just to survive, but to save something. Maybe both of them. A slow smile touched his lips. It was not the smooth, performative smile from the bar. It was a small, tired, genuine thing. It transformed his face. Okay, Lena, he said, her name a quiet promise. A partnership. He stepped back from the door, ceding the space to her. He was waiting for her to lead. It was her choice. Her terms. She picked up her worn black coat from the hook by the door, the one she'd been wearing when this all started. It felt like a lifetime ago. She slid it on, the familiar weight of comfort. Then she picked up the small bag she had packed in the pre-dawn hours, a bag filled with the bare essentials of a life she was voluntarily putting on hold. She walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the hallway, into the gray morning light. He followed her. They walked down the stairs and out of the building, into the rain, and into the waiting car. It was not an ending. It was not even a beginning. It was the moment of a deal being struck, a terrifying, hopeful contract signed not with ink, but with a choice. A choice to stop running from ghosts and to face the monsters head-on. A choice to trade a life that was safe for one that was real.